STEER's whole school mental health platform empowers teachers to measure, track and improve the self-regulation and mental well-being of every young person in your school so that you can know which students need your support and how to provide it. Let's imagine that your school has introduced STEER tracking. I'm going to show you what STEER data would enable you to see and what it would enable you to do. Upon logging in, your STEER platform looks like this. It's easy to navigate around using the menu just here. Now in this demonstration, I'm going to walk you through our entry modules, STEER Tracking and STEER Safeguarding. Our fully resourced online training modules enable you to train all your colleagues in a 2-hour Twilight training session. And any new colleagues, well, they can complete the training as part of their induction program. The STEER assessment will probably be different from assessments that your students have done before, but our age-appropriate student interfaces will both engage and reassure students. A student aged 11 to 14 would see a screen like this and would take 10 minutes to complete the assessment. Tracking all your students 3 times a year is made easy with our built-in assessment tracker, which is quick and simple for tutors to use. So let's imagine now that we're a Year 9 tutor logging in to see our tutees' data following the latest assessment round. Because my default filters are set for 9JW, I can instantly access my tutees' data. I can see at a glance who my most vulnerable students are because they've been ranked. The highest ranked students have scores that are significantly below or above the mean score of 7.5 in the 4 factors assessed by the STEER assessment. That's self-disclosure, trust of self, trust of others, and seeking change. We call these significantly lower or higher scores, polar biases. Let's find out what it means to have a self-disclosure polar bias by opening the self-disclosure teaching page.
Steering our self-disclosure allows us to regulate how visible we make our thoughts, feelings, opinions, and ideas. Like a theatre, we can share our thoughts, ideas, opinions, and feelings with an audience on our front stage, or we can keep them private on our backstage. Over time, we can develop a steering bias towards either high or low self-disclosure. Meet Alex. Alex has a bias toward higher self-disclosure, which means he's more likely to share his thoughts, feelings, opinions, and ideas with others and value openness. This makes him effective at reaching out for help, building openness, and expressing ideas or opinions authentically. However, Alex has to be careful that his higher self-disclosure doesn't become a polar bias, one that is fixed. A polar bias towards high self-disclosure increases Alex's risk of disclosing too much, making himself vulnerable, particularly online, and dominating conversations with his own thoughts and ideas. Meet Grace. Grace is lower self-disclosing, meaning she's more likely to keep her thoughts and feelings on her backstage and value her privacy. She may manage what she presents on her front stage, perhaps masking what she's really thinking or feeling. This enables Grace to hold confidences, be self-reflective, and work through thoughts and feelings on her own. However, Grace also has to be careful that her low self-disclosure doesn't become a polar bias. A polar low self-disclosure bias increases Grace's risk of masking her struggles, becoming emotionally and socially isolated, and being unable to receive support from others. Now let's meet Nadia. Nadia knows that she needs to steer her self-disclosure in different situations. For example, when she's struggling to understand a task and needs more support, Nadia can steer toward higher self-disclosure. On the other hand, when someone online asks her to share her address, Nadia can steer toward lower self-disclosure. Nadia's steering increases her social emotional agility and protects her against the social and mental health risks linked to polar biases.
Returning to my tutees, I can see one student with polar low self-disclosure. Tariq is a young man for whom there were no observable signs of concern, yet he's been flagged as a priority student, and I can see why. He has polar biases in 3 of the 4 factors. It's the first assessment in which Tariq has been flagged as a priority student, so this is a new concern for me. If I click on each factor score, I can see how Tariq's steering has changed over time. Both Tariq's self-disclosure and seeking change have dropped significantly, whilst his trust of self and trust of others have risen significantly. When I view Tariq's tracking page, his tracking history shows that up to his most recent assessment, Tariq had healthy steering in all 4 factors. But in this assessment, there's been a change. He's now struggling to steer, leading to increased risks. Given that Tariq has polar low self-disclosure, he's unlikely to tell me if anything's wrong or display any changes in his behaviour. At this point, I'd be recalling any observations, conversations, and changes in his attendance and academic data that might explain what might have triggered this change. Clicking on Tariq's self-disclosure slider, we can explore his self-disclosure history, his polar low self-disclosure risks, his responses to the self-disclosure questions, and I can imagine how it feels to be polar low self-disclosing like Tariq. I could explore Tariq's polar high trust of self and polar low seeking change in exactly the same way. Now that I've identified Tariq's risks, I want to know how to proactively target my support. But before we write an action plan, let me address a couple of points about the action planning process. First of all, we know that teachers have limited time, and that's why STEER student action plans take less than 10 minutes to write. Second, we know effective action plans are targeted and achievable, so we lead teachers through a simple and scaffolded process. Thirdly, we value teachers' professional judgment, so we draw on this throughout. We're going to write a student action plan to support Tariq in school. So first, I select which factor I want to address. Then I consider why Tariq might be low self-disclosing. So using my own professional judgment, I select prompts from the bank provided. Next, I judge which risks Tariq might be vulnerable to if he continues to be polar low self-disclosing. Again, I use my professional judgment to select from a bank of prompts. I select which goal I want Tariq to work towards and which signpost will help reach his goal. Then I personalise the signpost for Tariq. Notice how I draw on the resources, colleagues and opportunities already available in school, but target them to support Tariq. Next, I name myself and the basketball coach as responsible for implementing and reviewing Tariq's action plan. And finally, I set a review date. Now, most schools set time aside in a staff meeting to both write and review action plans. And here is Tariq's completed action plan, ready to print, email or export just as you wish. I won't be sharing the action plan directly with Tariq or his family, but it will prompt conversations with them both. Having written and implemented Tariq's action plan, I want to measure its impact. So to do that, we draw on both teacher judgment and assessment data. Shortly before the next assessment is due, I add my teacher judgment, which only takes a few seconds to do. Now, running ahead to next term, 9JW have completed their next assessment, so I can measure what impact the action plan has had. By clicking here, I can see that Tariq's self-disclosure has increased. And it's great to see also that 2 other student action plans are showing an impact as well. Our termly assessment cycle means that I can monitor these positive changes to ensure they're sustained. But you'll notice that Lenny's action plan hasn't yet had an impact. I'll write a second action plan for this term, as it may take a little longer to have an impact on Lenny. So now that I've walked you through the platform, let's remind ourselves what STEER tracking will enable you to do. It'll track every student's social, emotional development from the age of 8 to 18, term by term, year on year. Identify students with emerging risks earlier, even if those risks are hidden. Equip your teachers with targeted strategies to support vulnerable students and their families. And evidence measurable impact on students' personal development. Now imagine how powerful it would be if you could measure, support and improve student self-regulation not only in but outside school as well. Let me explain how STEER safeguarding enables you to do just this. Extending the STEER assessment by just 5 minutes lets you track your students' self-regulation both in and out of school. This invaluable data set enables you to identify students at risk out of school and equip families with targeted strategies to improve their child's self-regulation at home and in the community. Schools using STEER safeguarding will see an additional set of assessment scores for each student. But what can this data tell us about our highest priority students? Notice Mia. Mia has polar biases both in and out of school, indicating that she has risks in both contexts. It's reassuring to know that she's already been referred to the school counsellor. We'll be able to measure the impact of this intervention as we continue to track Mia. Mo only has polar biases in school, which might explain why his attendance has dropped and his academic progress plateaued. For Mo, our school is a risk factor. If we want to improve his attendance and his academic progress, understanding his STEER data will be invaluable. Isla has polar biases outside of school, but none in school. Now, whilst the data shows that our school is a protective factor, it's very worrying that a student we had no concerns about in school might be vulnerable out of school. To drill deeper into her data, we can view her tracking page and toggle between in and out of school. Looking at her trust of self as an example, we can see that Isla is able to steer her trust of self in school, but out of school her trust of self is really low, making her vulnerable to these risks. Using the Family Signpost Action Planning tool, we can create a bespoke, targeted action plan to equip Isla's family with simple, practical strategies to help Isla increase her trust of self at home and in the community. We know that students like Tariq, Mia, Mo and Isla are particularly vulnerable to safeguarding risks, whether they be grooming, bullying, substance abuse, radicalization or any other risks that endanger young people. STEER safeguarding alerts us to the specific risks for each student and whether they're most likely to be encountered in or out of school. Let's step for a moment into a meeting between the head of Year 9 and your school DSL as they discuss safeguarding risks in Year 9. Now on the menu, they select Safeguarding to see all the priority students in Year 9 ranked in terms of highest to lowest priority, both in and out of school. Notice Isla, one of the most vulnerable students out of school. Her assessment history shows darker red icons, indicating Isla's risks have been present across several assessment rounds. The longer she's been at risk, the more concerned we should be. Clicking on Isla's name, we can see her polar biases, and clicking on each shows us their specific safeguarding risks. We can anticipate the conversation that may follow between the head of Year 9, the DSL and Isla's tutor as they discern the safeguarding risks they need to be most alert to. Isla's risks are no longer hidden, enabling the school and family to work together to reduce those risks and keep Isla safe. STEER safeguarding is like an early radar warning, alerting you to safeguarding risks that you might not pick up on otherwise. Using STEER safeguarding, you can act earlier to safeguard your students both in and out of school.